This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Don't tell me they don't use money in the 23rd century.
Well, we don't.
The economics of the future are somewhat different. The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives.
We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
What does that mean exactly?
It means we don't need money.
This is something Trek writers and fans have been grappling with for decades. How does Star Trek's future society work? Now, 6 months ago, I made the first installment in what was meant to be a series on this subject. The previous video covered money, work, and property, but there's so much more. To sum up the previous video, in Star Trek's future, replicators not only take care of our basic needs, but they also make us totally self-sufficient, with no need to connect to any grid. Our possessions are neither communal nor private, but personally owned, something which is understood via social contract. This leaves us free to pursue the work which is truly fulfilling to us on a deeper level. There is no theft because no one is driven to desperation through poverty, and no item can be stolen and then sold off because there's no money. Wars over natural resources are obsolete because every resource is now abundant. This video will explore how social contracts are enforced, how society deals with bad apples, and how the government of Star Trek's future works. Before we get to that though, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, the only tool you'll need to create a beautiful looking website for your business, portfolio, or online store. I used it to create my production company's website, and I didn't know the first thing about coding. I just found a template that worked for me and customized it using simple drag and drop tools. And now the process is even easier thanks to Squarespace's new blueprint system. Choose from a variety of professionally curated layout and styling options, tailored to your own website and optimized for every device. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast thanks to integrated SEO tools, and grow the way you want. Jump over to Squarespace using the link below to start building your website and use the coupon code Rowan for 10% off your first purchase. Here's a hypothetical scenario for you. What if one day some asshole kicks down the front door to Chateau Picard, trashes the place, and then just refuses to leave? What happens then in Star Trek's future? In the modern day, depending on where you live, you can call the police who will show up and remove the asshole for trespassing. Today we have strict private property laws. But if there's no private property in Star Trek's future, only personal property, what happens then? We rarely see any kind of police force in Star Trek's future. Other than brief appearances from Starfleet security, we've only ever seen that one robot guy in Star Trek 2009. Perhaps there is a police force that simply enforces the social contracts of personal property the way police protect private property today, but frankly, I don't buy it. That seems like a very boring solution to this problem, and if personal property is defined in law the way I described previously, it's way too vague and it's a goldmine for NIMBYs. No. To solve this intellectual puzzle, personal property will remain a social contract, not the literal law. So how do we deal with an asshole like this? Unfortunately, some people are just dicks regardless of their economic status. So what do we do about this asshole in our scenario? To explore the answer to this question, let's take a quick trip over to the Orville. I don't think it's uncontroversial to say the Orville was basically Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek fanfiction. I don't say that as a negative, the Orville was fantastic after its rocky first season, but it's undeniable how much influence Star Trek had on that show. Like Star Trek, the Orville presents us with a utopian future where money is obsolete, replicators can make anything upon request, and people generally seem to lead happy, fulfilling lives, so the comparison isn't unwarranted. In the Season 2 episode All the World is Birthday Cake, Commander Grayson says this:
"Our currency is reputation. An individual's wealth is determined by their personal achievements, not their monetary value."
Now, at first glance, this raises just as many questions as we work to better ourselves, but I think this idea is key to understanding the worlds depicted in the Orville and Star Trek. In our modern world, shitty people can get away with doing shitty things as long as they have money.
Look, here's the thing about being rich. You get to do what you want, the authorities can't really touch you. Okay, it's like being a superhero, only better.
But in a world where reputation is currency, this kind of power imbalance isn't possible, because the only capital is social capital. In a sense, the concept of reputation as a currency creates a kind of social panopticon. People generally behave themselves because if they don't, others won't want to interact with them. The social bonds between individuals keep everyone in check. This is another reason why people still work despite not earning a wage. Sure, you could just sit on the couch binging your favorite TV show round the clock, and in a future where all your needs are met thanks to abundant resources, it doesn't do any harm, but would anyone want to hang out with someone who does nothing and has no ambitions? Getting up off the couch and striving to achieve something would yield social rewards. It would mean meeting new people, collaborating or competing with them, learning, trying, failing, and trying again. This is what working to better ourselves means. In terms of material rewards, this also helps explain why Starfleet officers tend to have nice country houses and beachfront apartments. When a property owner is deciding who to let to, money plays a big role, but there's also a social mechanism at work. The landlord has to judge whether they think the potential tenants will be good people. In Star Trek's future, the social metric is the only metric. Highly decorated Starfleet officers would wield a lot of social capital, so it's no surprise they often end up with lovely-looking homes. So if we return to our original hypothetical scenario, the asshole who broke into Chateau Picard, trashed the place and squatted may not get the police called on him, but he would have wiped out his social capital. Who would want to work with this guy, or hang out with this guy, or offer this guy a house if this is how they act? That being said, a social panopticon is most effective at preventing bad behavior. What happens when someone breaks all the social contracts and just doesn't care about the consequences? What happens when force is needed to prevent harm? Now, one possible option is simply to use in-universe technology for home defense. We've heard of the Ciscos having a private transporter system in their house, so why not just beam any intruders out onto the pavement? If they try to get back in, just activate a force field. That's a simple enough solution, but again, it feels too easy to me. What if a trespasser trashes the site-to-site transporter and breaks the force field emitters? Does every household just have force fields on by default as a preventative measure? That doesn't feel very Star Trek to me. We need to go bigger and talk about governance. In Star Trek, the largest governing body we see is the Federation, which we can assume is a federal democracy. The clue is in the name. But other than that, we don't see any kind of smaller local government. But if you stop to think about it, maybe there doesn't need to be. People often refer to Star Trek's future, jokingly or not, as space communism, but the term doesn't really apply. Honestly, I don't think any economic model applies to the future scene in Star Trek, because in a sense, there is no economy. There's no money, no one buys anything, there is no trade, free or otherwise. Surprisingly, I think Star Trek's future is far more individualist than collectivist. The few glimpses we see of life away from Starfleet are far more transcendentalist than socialist. Transcendentalism is a philosophy which assumes that people are, for the most part, good by nature. People are at their best when they are independent and self-reliant, with an emphasis placed on living within nature. The country estate of Chateau Picard and the log cabins of James T. Kirk or Christopher Pike feel like the literal embodiment of this philosophy. The house Sisko wanted to build on Bajor and the brief rustic existence shared by Janeway and Chakotay also fit this mold. Remember that in Star Trek's future there is no scarcity and everyone is self-sufficient. There's no need for any kind of larger organization to manage the allocation of resources. It's also worth remembering that in Star Trek's future, international travel is super easy. You can travel from London to Shanghai as easily as hopping on the underground. No one's social or professional strata are limited by geography. You can make friends and colleagues anywhere on the planet. We know that in Star Trek there aren't really any nations left on Earth. No one strongly identifies with a single nation, unless you're French, because everyone is simply an individual. There is no us versus them because we're all just individuals of the human race. In this kind of world, what does local even mean anymore? Why would any emergency service restrict itself to one area of the globe when any destination on Earth is just one transporter trip or shuttle ride away? Perhaps emergency services in Star Trek function like international rescue in Thunderbirds. Going anywhere in the world, their services are needed. And at that point, maybe it's just Starfleet. Despite how Earth-centric Starfleet and the Federation are, it's worth remembering that, on paper, Earth is no different from any other member world. Starfleet may have originated as an Earth organization, but its primary duty is to the Federation as a whole. But if Starfleet is both defending the Federation against outside threats and responding to local conflicts, doesn't that make it a military and a police force? If so, Commander Adama has something to say about that.
There's a reason why you separate military and the police. One fights the enemy of the state. The other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, then the enemies of the state tend to become the people.
However, despite functioning a lot like a military, Star Trek characters and fans alike will insist that Starfleet is not a military. I think we can say that even though Starfleet does fulfill the traditional role of the military, it has so many other functions that just calling it a military is inaccurate. Because Starfleet is also about scientific research and exploration. So perhaps Starfleet does just do everything, policing included. Perhaps Starfleet security has the authority to arrest the hypothetical squatter at Chateau Picard because he'd be infringing on the rights laid out by the Federation Charter. Perhaps Starfleet security is everyone's police force, Starfleet medical is everyone's healthcare provider, and so on. That would make sense, but it would also make the universe a little too Robert A. Heinlein for my liking. We also see plenty of examples of non-Starfleet scientists and security personnel, etc. I think it makes sense for there to be some kind of planetary emergency services, which occasionally work with Starfleet, though it makes the most sense for all of these services to be based in Earth orbit. So if push comes to shove and the squatter doesn't leave, a police force of some kind, whether it be Starfleet security or a separate multinational law enforcement agency, arrests the trespasser and escorts him off the property. Later, I'd imagine the perp is offered counseling or some kind of support service as opposed to simply being thrown in jail. We haven't seen any prisons in the Star Trek universe. There are brigs on Starfleet vessels and stations, but on Earth, prisons seem to have been replaced by penal colonies, which focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment, much like the Norwegian prisons described by Rutger Bregman in his book Humankind: A Hopeful History. These are facilities in which inmates, even murderers, are part of a community, doing their own farming and running their own businesses. Yet despite how naive the approach may sound, the system is far more successful at reforming criminals than more rigid institutions focused on punishment. It makes sense for Star Trek's justice system to work in this way. While post-scarcity living and a social panopticon discourage harmful behavior, when force is required, it's to put criminals on a path to rehabilitation, so that they can one day return to society. After all, they're going to have to be somebody's neighbor eventually. So to sum up, the idea of working to better ourselves and the rest of humanity is based on the concept of reputation as currency. Individuals wield social capital to yield social and material rewards. Because everyone is so self-sufficient and individualized, the role of government is largely centralized to the Federation Council, which maintains and expands the Federation Charter in accordance with the wishes of voters. Starfleet, meanwhile, works together with planetary authorities to respond to any emergencies which may arise, be they large disasters or small social disputes. It is a future society in which kindness, generosity, integrity, and ambition are rewarded and never squandered. The lazy and lethargic are still cared for. They may miss out on what life has to offer, but that's their choice. Antisocial or violent individuals are given a path to rehabilitation, and only secluded when necessary until they can participate in society again. But what happens when individuals want to do more than self-sufficiency? Who is building the homes, the bars, cafes, restaurants, and amusement parks, and all those other things which life demands when there isn't an emergency to respond to? We'll cover that in the next video. Thank you for watching. Leave the video a like, and if you want to stay up to date on future uploads, hit the subscribe button and bell icon. You can also see videos early, uncut, and ad-free by joining me on Patreon. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my patrons and members with an ultra thanks to Alex Miller, Eamon Kelly, Michael Hardy, Ian Hodge, County Ark, Mike Halsey, Retro PC Gamer, Benjamin Stokes, Hiroshi the Dog, Movie Magic, Charles Borsam, Olivia Computer, Jr., Bano, Extreme Streamers, Tom, Dusk, Colin Camille, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Ed Mark Starr, Dylan Thomas, Lilac Yane, Howard Craig Akervik, and Caging G. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, have a good one.